Welcome everyone, Costin here with a quick discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and I want to talk about the Dark Elves and the changes they've gone through in patch 2.2, as I have actually experienced them in this particular campaign as Lokier Fellheart. I spent a lot of today actually going through this campaign to get the feel for how is. I've done this campaign before the patch, so I have a pretty good feeling about how things are different pre-patch, post-patch. So what has Creative Assembly done with the slaves? Well, in short, they've made public order a bigger issue. They've limited your capacity to get slaves far more so than it was before. But at the same time, they've also given you more rewards if you do have a lot of slaves, a lot of capacity. And it is easier to get to the various slave tiers, because depending on how many slaves you get different tiers of benefits. So for instance, right here, I am on a high level. Based on what they've posted in their patch notes, this would be tier 3. Tier 5 is 5,000. It used to be 10,000 slaves. So getting to tier 1 is easier, getting to tier 2 is easier, getting to tier 3 between 2,000 to 5,000 is easier. In fact, you can get to tier 3 within like the first couple of turns. You just need the structures for it. Or in the case of Lokier Fellheart, you need the Black Arcs, because the Black Arcs do have a fairly solid amount of slave capacity. But here's how I'm going to view it when it comes to it. So you do suffer more from public order. You suffer more not just because the slaving tiers are going to affect your public order, but also because the structure that you need to increase your slave capacity also has gotten a new addition, which affects the control in a province. And Dark Elves, although they have good control, they don't have enough to deal with -2 control from the slave pens, -3 from, let's say, tier 3 of slaves, and then of course -8 from the difficulty level. Now you can play with a mod that removes the public order penalty, but even then you probably are not going to have the best public order in the world. In point of fact, when I'm looking at my province, I haven't had a single slave rebellion or a single rebellion so far, but at the same time, all of my provinces are at a fairly low level of public order. In fact, I haven't even bothered with any province that had a lot of climate of an unpleasant kind or uninhabitable climate, like the mountains or the magical forest. So it's a bit weird that Dark Elves who live in the frozen north can't inhabit mountains. Just a bit odd, really, when it comes to that. And yet Lokier has no problems with the jungle. But anyway, that's beyond the point. So you're gonna have major issues when it comes to public order. You already did. Slaves have always caused issues in terms of public order. Now, to kind of offset this, they do give you the ability to put open markets pretty much everywhere. But here's the catch. The dictats are pretty expensive in terms of slaves. Open markets 600, slave drive is 400, and fight to death is 400. On top of that, they've increased the cost of the rights. Now, Lokier can reduce the cost of sacrifice to Anathema through his skill tree, so that's why it's only 200 there. But they've also substantially increased the cost of the rights to the slaves. And they've made slave decay far more substantial. So, for instance, in this turn, I've lost almost 1,000 slaves. At the beginning of it, I've lost almost 1,000 slaves because of all the buildings I have that consume them. That's because what happens is, based on patch notes, like the worse your public order is, the more slaves you're going to lose per turn. Now, it would be nice to have like an understanding of that like somewhere in the game instead of being calculating itself. Like they've given us the percentages in the patch notes, but it would be nice to have that kind of information in game. But suffice it to say, the worse your public order is, the more slaves you're going to lose. And you're also going to lose, I feel like, with the patch. I don't have the patch notes right in front of me, but I think you're just going to lose more slaves by default with this patch. Okay, so that's how it works. The benefits, of course, is you get more benefits. Specifically, they've added an income benefit that can go up to 20%. But that would require a ridiculously high amount of slaves. At tier 4, let's say at tier 3, which is fairly reasonable to get, you are going to have an income from all buildings of 5%. At tier 4, which requires 5,000, I would get 10%, and at tier 5, 20%. Pretty substantial if you can get that 20%, but I think that's for a global spanning empire. Because right now I do have a decent chunk of cafe, and I've been fighting battles non-stop, and I'm not at tier 4, let alone being able to get to tier 5. Now, this hasn't necessarily been the best campaign. You certainly need to make adjustments to the way you're going to play the campaign. Because before the patch, you would just get, the slave capacity buildings, and you wouldn't care about anything else. But I think what Creative Assembly is trying to do with this particular version is they're trying to move people away from just getting slave capacity and basing their economy, at least their early game economy, on slaves, or every region on slaves. They want to move away from that, so they've reduced the threshold, but they've also nerfed the structures. Like the slave capacity as slave pens has been nerfed, and they've added that minus control. So my perspective on the subject matter is slaves are less useful early on, though you obviously will need them. They've mandated that basically you need to have at least 100 slaves at or higher at the start of a turn for the structures to give their secondary benefit. Without it, they will not work. Though might have been working like that anyway before that. They've also added to Black Arcs, they've added extra slaves from the prison wing chain. So these Black Arcs are generating 40 slaves each. I have 4 of them, or I'm generating 160 from buildings, 160 slaves from buildings every single turn. Now I don't have a lot of high level Black Arcs, but yeah, point being, you're going to lose slaves more. It's going to be harder to increase your capacity because only major settlements are increasing capacity right now, not minor settlements. So the minor settlement chains are no longer doing it. The major settlement chains are still doing it, of course, but yeah, it does feel certainly more restrictive in terms of getting your initial capacity. So I think like Creative Assembly just doesn't want you to have a lot of slaves early on, because you just end up in a situation where you're steamrolling the game without real effort. Like I'm ranked number 5, and I haven't really faced any serious opposition with the exception of Xiao Ming over here, though Grimgor is coming in to finish the job. It's kind of funny to see Grimgor invading Cafe just to kill a certain guy, but that's his personal style. However, although slaves are going to be less useful and less important early on, less impactful, and you're going to struggle to even be able to do the rights constantly, let alone maintain your buildings and all that, although that's certainly going to be the case, that's not necessarily too big of an issue. Because one, you can still certainly maintain enough slaves so buildings are operating at full capacity. So for instance, at tier 1 you're generating that 300 income as opposed to 200, that the ports are generating almost 200 income or 170 income at tier 1. That's not necessarily going to be too big of an issue. But especially because pretty much every single battle and a lot of settlements do give you a ridiculous amount of slaves when you take them. Like I can get over 1,000 for a single battle if I'm fighting a full enemy stack, and you can be certain that on higher difficulties in Warhammer 3 you are going to be fighting full stacks. It actually kind of gets a bit frustrating, I guess, because, you know, you're getting a lot of slaves, but you're at capacity. I think, like, the capacity could, like, I don't necessarily agree with the capacity aspect. I understand Creative Assembly doesn't just want people to get, like, 10,000 slaves within the first 20 turns, and believe me, that's doable. They don't want that to happen, but I do feel, I feel like, my options are restricted to it. Now, of course, there are a lot of downsides to getting slaves, because in post-battle loot, you're not getting the money or the experience, so the money is more important, and when you're taking settlements, you need to sack them. And while sacking settlements has a lot of benefits in general, just doing that automatically because you want more slaves isn't necessarily the best gameplay style. So I think maybe this is just a perception. I think Creative Assembly doesn't want players to feel like they absolutely, in every situation, after every battle, to get the slaves. That's my view. Will it work? That's an interesting question, because I think there's two ways this can go for player campaigns. Either people take this to an extreme. This is exactly what I've done in this campaign. Like, every settlement, or pretty much every settlement, I've built a lot of slave capacity or control, or both. Right. Just to increase that capacity. Granted, I wanted to reach that 5,000 slave threshold, but now I'm finding myself in a situation that I've got so many settlements and so many ports in particular, and the public order is so bad on a lot of them that I'm losing a lot of slaves each turn. So even though I'm earning a lot in every battle, I'm not generating enough to just easily go over 5,000. Besides, I keep doing rights that require slaves, and I could keep issuing diktats, because you need to issue those diktats if you're going to maintain public order in the provinces you have. So that's one way of viewing it. Another, that you do go to that extreme, and I think someone like Lokir, who obviously can get black arcs like no one else because he can get them for a major port. I'm at capacity right now, but yeah, I have like two black arcs over here at my main settlement. And literally, I've only maxed out the black arcs because I wanted the slave capacity. So I've got 3 so far, 4, 5, 6. One is on the way. So I've got 6 black arcs. One is on the sea routes. It's heading over, or actually, it's already arrived. Yeah, I'm sending a nice, solid invasion force over here in Lustria. Although I might want to just fight Hexuato. Eventually I'll just send Lokir there as well. In fact, I'm probably going to start moving there with him, because I'm pretty much done with Cafe in this campaign. But yeah, that's one way you can view it. The other way is you don't care about slave as much. Like, as long as you have, like, let's say 1,000 or 2,000, which is not too hard to get a hold of, really. As long as you have, like, say 1,000, you're mostly fine. You won't be able to pop everything in a turn, diktats and all that, but you can pop, you can use a right, fight the battle, then do a diktat, like, do the right at the beginning of the turn, fight the battle right after that, then use a diktat after you have fought the battle. So you're not really going to suffer because of that. You're not really going to suffer from that perspective. Like, you're mainly using slaves. Like, when you're consuming slaves, you're mainly consuming them for the sake of diktats and for the sake of rights. Beyond that, you're consuming them, obviously, they get consumed to keep the buildings operational. So you don't necessarily need to rush for slaves in every building. You don't need to rush for capacity, though. Getting over 2,000 capacity, getting over 2,000 slaves, getting that tier 3 benefit does have some substantial construction cost benefit, construction time benefit, and 5% income. So I would say that getting over 2,000 to 2,500 is something that's perfectly doable. You don't need to go to an extreme level. So you can go with a balanced approach. You can not care about it. Really, you don't necessarily need to care about it too much. Obviously, you'll have to care about it to a degree because of the rights and because of the diktats, but you don't have to care about it to an extreme level. What do I feel about the change overall? Well, my perspective is, why did Creative Assembly need to mess with the Dark Elves in general? Like, you know, I understand, like, they can't fix a major game like this with all of the issues it has that is in beta that requires time to fix. But what is frustrating and baffling to me is, like, of all the races in the game that they decided to change the Dark Elves. I mean, I understand some people that really like the way Dark Elves were in Warhammer 2, like Legend of Total War, made a lot of noise about it. Like, some people mentioned this. It's like, oh, the reason they focus on Dark Elves is because Legend made the video and the people who follow him made a lot of noise and so on and so forth, so they had to look at the system. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Could be, might be, might not be. I mean, those kind of things do matter, but maybe not as much as some people might believe. But at the same time, like, having played the Dark Elves, having played Dark Elven campaigns, I can tell you they were in a really good spot in the sense that they were good, but not too overpowered. Like, I understand that that their logic, the one they've stated themselves, they wanted to make the mechanic more interesting. But why put time and effort and energy that could have been better spent elsewhere? Empire, Dwarves, Kislev, demons, like literally all the demonic factions minus Scarbrand need a lot of looking into. None of them, like none of those races that I've just mentioned have gotten anything as significant as this, or Skaven. I mean, we know Creative Assembly is biased in favor of Skaven, but with the Dark Elves, it's just like, it's the wrong priorities as far as I see it when it came to the patch. Like, granted, what they stated that was their main focus of the patch was campaign AI, minor settlement battles, and all that. They did improve on that. Let's be clear, and let's be absolutely clear on that. They did improve. Are there still issues with AI? Yes, absolutely, but it is in a much better state than it was before, as is the difficulty, though that's affecting the weaker races quite badly since they already had issues as things were. But the wrong priorities, I feel, for Creative Assembly. Beyond that, as for how I feel the system works, I think it's weaker early game, more limited early game, but actually stronger later game. With a lot more trade-offs, don't get me wrong, there are trade-offs to it, but it is actually a stronger system in the late game, because it's easier than it was before to get to the tier 5 benefit, and it's a far more substantial benefit, though at a greater control cost, but it's a far more substantial benefit in terms of your economy. Imagine getting 20% flat out economic bonus at tier 5 of slaves. That is fairly substantial, I feel. So it means that the Dark Elves will scale even better than they already were, and they were in a pretty good spot beforehand, but they're going to scale even better in the mid-late game, which is going to make them overall stronger if you can manage the public order. Like, it probably nerfs them in the early game. Was that necessary? I don't necessarily think the Dark Elves needed any change to begin with. I've said my piece on that. Was that necessary? Were the Dark Elves so really strong? I mean, it's kind of hilarious to think about that they nerfed the Dark Elves basically in the early game in terms of some of their economic potential, if you will. And then buff them in the late game when, you know, there's races that do far better than they do in terms of economy, and they're in all aspects of the game. Greenskins and Warriors of Chaos in particular, which haven't been touched. Like, we can talk about, so they kind of nerfed the Dark Elves, but not really. Then they kind of buffed them, but not really. And there are other races that need significant balance tweaks. Like, just forget the improvements for a second, reworks or anything like that. Like, there are a lot of races that need quite a lot more work and could have used this attention better than the Dark Elves. That's ultimately where I stand on this. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.